Welcome to Zorpazorp Gaming. My name is Lachie, and today we've got an awesome terrain tutorial for the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game for this wicked little Arnor ruin that you see before you. I had to bang this guy out for our latest round of battle companies where we've modified the Weathertop style scenario, and we're going to have a big warg pack attacking our battle company. So I had to make a centerpiece for that scenario that incorporated a sort of more generic Arnor ruin so that I can use the board for all sorts of things. So it could be anywhere. It could be Armon Sul, or it could be any of the wonderful Arnor ruins across northern Arnorian and all through that land of Middle-earth. I'm really stoked with how it came out. We're going to explore a whole bunch of cool techniques, especially Hirst Arts moulds. They're amazing. It's the first time I've worked with them, and this is kind of a testing ground for a big future Arnor project that I have in design at the moment, and I think it worked pretty well. We're also going to have a look at just all that kind of classic static grass techniques, but really building like a big centerpiece, a big focal point in the center of a board. It works so well for so many different scenarios, and it kind of gives the board some real shape moving up towards the center for stuff that's all about central objectives. So it's turned out to be a really wonderful little board, and I've had a great time making it. So let's jump into checking out what we're going to need to start with, all the techniques we're going to be focusing on, and how we're going to build this Arnor ruin. So first of all, I'm going to set up our casting workstation. I'm going to be returning to this workstation throughout the day to cast these molds over and over again because we need so many bricks to make our Arnorian ruin. As you can see, I've been hard at work already, kind of checking out the process and cooking it all off, and I've got to say, it's probably the most user-friendly terrain making process I've come across. It is so fantastically easy, and the results are mind-blowing. So, what do we need? First of all, we obviously need our molds. I've got 3 molds here. The main mold that we'll be using is mold number 65, which is the Ruined Tower mold, which is very obviously inspired by Weathertop. And then we've got 2 other molds here, mold 40, which is the basic brick mold, which just gives us lots of basic bricks, and mold 65, which is the prison tower mold, I think, off the top of my head. So all 3 of these molds have really awesome Gondorian and Arnorian architecture features, even though I'll only be using really the Ruined Tower mold for the Weathertop build. I've got a lot of other ruins sort of for the next boards down the track, so I'm just going to cast all 3 to just start building up my stockpile of pieces. Now, we're going to need casting material. That's probably our most important element. So I'm using a plaster called Hydra Stone. If you use something like Plaster of Paris or any of the kind of generic plasters, you're going to get really crappy results. They won't cast well, and your parts will break pretty easily. So it's really important to use something that has the right sort of properties for this kind of scale stuff. So Hydra Stone has really good compressive strength. You can throw it across the floor and it'll barely get damaged. It's got really good viscosity when it's mixed up in the right proportion, and it had like wonderful flow rates, and it allows air bubbles to move through it really easily so they don't stay inside the mold and leave lots of little deformations inside your cast. So it's a really fantastic material. I've got a 22 kilo bag for 55 Australian dollars, which is cheap as chips for kind of high quality stuff. A lot of people suggest using dental stone, but it's a lot more expensive, and Hydra Stone basically is non-buff dental stone, so it's really great. It doesn't have the shiny sheen, a really nice matte finish, as you guys can sort of see here. It's fantastic. You're going to need just sort of a mixing pail. I've also got 3 other cups here. One is just full of water, and then I've got just 2 other mixing cups, which you'll kind of see how the process works. And of course we need some scales, because everything is measured by weight, by mass, and just a pound board, which is just an old book wrapped up in some plastic, which we use to help get rid of air bubbles. So to start off with, for these 3 molds, I need about 400 grams of plaster with the water. That's sort of just what I know off the top of my head. So the first thing I'm going to do is chuck a cup on my scales and tear it off, so that we've got 0 with the cup on there. And now I'm going to mix this up in 2 lots of 200. So I'll just get a bunch in there to start. How much is that? That's 77. Okay, we're going to need a bit more than that. 127. Not being heavy-handed enough. Oh, 189, getting there. Oh, well, that was optimistic. 212. 199. Get there, we get there? Come on, come on, come on. 200. All right. So 200. Now the mix ratio is 100 to 32 plaster to water. So if I've got 200 grams of plaster, I'm going to need 64 grams of water. Now you can sort of see why I've got the 2-cup system. So we'll start pouring in our water. I need to get this to 64, 48, 67, just a few drops back the other way. I try and keep it as exact as possible. Some people aren't too worried about it, but this way I can just control all of my variables, and if anything starts to go wrong with the cast, I can work out what it was. So mixing ratios are perfect. Now this is a completely clean cup, but if you're reusing your cup, it's often better to chuck your water in first and just sort of give it a bit of a zhuzh to pick up any of the loose parts from the last mixing resolution. It sort of saves you washing it out completely if you're mixing fairly quickly on the go. And now just a mixing stick, which is just a paddle pop stick for me. So we just want to get it really even, basically. You don't want to be too mental because you don't want to put too much air bubbles into it, but it's a really, really user-friendly material. You don't have to be too worried about it. Mixy, mixy, mixy. Make sure you pick up all the loose stuff off the sides. And it might look even on the surface, but you'll get like some hard clumps down near the bottom, so make sure you're scraping off all that plaster that's made contact with surfaces and made pockets of dry material. If you need to get rid of air bubbles, you can kind of zhuzh it around nice and evenly. That helps mitigate a lot of the large air bubbles. There we go, that's feeling really smooth. Let's set up these little 3 here. Alright. So we want to pour enough material that obviously it fills in all of the mold, but we don't want it to have a big surplus of material sitting across the top. Eventually we will kind of scrape off all that excess, but you don't want to be wasting material, so just make sure you're putting the right amount in. That saves you time in the back end. Alright. Bit more over here. Okay, that'll probably do us for that mold. Should be able to move what I have around to fill in those last remaining bits. Get in there. Go on, get in there. There we go, that's nice. So that's a nice look when we've got perfectly even amount of material that we can just see the green mold underneath, because there is a bit of shrinkage as it dries, so you want just a little bit of surplus material, but you don't want it on too thick, otherwise you get uneven bottoms of the bricks, or they get sort of taller than they're supposed to be. So this mixture might not do this whole mold for us, but that's okay, we knew that would happen. I'll just get all of it out that I can. Beautiful. Just move that around so it's not going to flow anywhere off the sides while we're busy. Alright, let's mix up our second batch. So what did we say we needed? We needed 64 grams of water. So I'm going to put that in first. Oh, first go. That does not happen very often. So by putting the water in first, it can sort of help wash into the rest of the slurry. There we go. And now we want 200 grams of plaster. How much is that to start with? Oh, that's 148. I'll just grab some more. Go on and put water in my plaster cup. That was a good move, Lachie. 200. All right, there we go. Now be careful when you're shaking in your plaster that you're not, you don't drop it all in too fast, and then it goes everywhere and all over you, and you look like someone's throwing flour in your face. There we go. That's looking good. Finish off this first mold. So you can see the flow rate is really, really great. It's quite liquidy, not very viscous, and it just moves in really easily. Now it's got a working time of 20 minutes, or a curing time, and I found that, well, that's what it says on the box. I found it sometimes it's a little bit longer than that, but it's great because it means you can just rinse and repeat and smash through a whole bunch of molds over the course of a day while you're working on other bits and pieces. So that's what we're going to be doing. While I'm shaping the hill and getting all of that element ready, I'll just keep coming back and making more and more and more, and hopefully by the end of the day I'll have enough to assemble a tower at the top of the hill and then get it all undercoated and ready to paint tomorrow. So in about 5 or 6 minutes time, once it's starting to thicken up a little bit, I'll just come back and kind of scrape off any of the stuff that's a bit too thick and a bit too pulled, and then about 15 minutes after that it should be set, and we'll come back and crack them all out. Alright, so our molds have cured. Just have a look. You can tell basically when they look nice and hard, and when we peel it back, everything starts to crack really nicely with all that loose stuff. So our first step, just move these guys out of the way, is just to get rid of all this loose crap on the surface. So just start plying that mold, bend her open, shake it all off like that. And that's a good indicator that we've used the right amount of material, because we don't have huge big chunks that won't break and are sticking to the mold, and as we start to pull pieces out, there's barely any flash around them already. We don't even have to break much off, it's just the right size as it comes straight out of the mold. So now I need to put these over there. I'm just keeping all my 3 molds separate, so it's easier for me to break stuff up later. And then we just go through and we just pop everything out. Some of the stuff you might need to really push through from the other side, but most of it just comes out really easily. Some of the stairs are a bit trickier because the last thing you want to do is tear any of this silicone. It's really durable stuff, but some of these pieces have fairly sharp edges. And then once you're finished, just clap off all of the excess material. And then they're ready to go for round 2. So I'm going to do that another 20 or so times, I think, to have enough material for the ruined tower, and then we can start playing Lego, basically, with all our little pieces of resin. So the next phase is to work on the hilltop, which acts as the base for our Arnorian ruin. As you can see, I've just whacked together a couple of sheets of extruded polystyrene and had them gluing and taped overnight. So now we're just going to come in and create all the kind of rock work around the edges and slope ourselves up a path and start to really give shape to how the ruin's going to sit on the board. Now to do that, I'm going to use my hot wire cutter, which I've just made up yesterday. This is just a couple of coat hangers drilled together to give ourselves a nice arc. And then we've got a piece of steel string coming across here, and I'm just hooking it all up off one of my Ryobi batteries. You can do it with a car battery or you can use mains power if you've got a transformer and wire that in as well, but I just like to be really mobile in my Ryobi batteries. I've got loads of them, so they're easy to swing in and out. I won't go crazy with doing that. If you guys want to build a hot wire cutter, there's a 200,000 tutorials on YouTube. Don't know why people keep thinking they need to make them. So have a look there. I can put a little photo of this in the description as well if you guys want to check out mine. It's pretty hilarious. So what we're going to do here, now I've just got my power connected up. This is my very sophisticated on switch connecting my alligator clip. You can see my wire is starting to glow. Now we can just come in and take shapes out of it. So I'm just going to get to work and start carving away all the different rock surfaces and start to really make something interesting. One thing that's incredible about the hot wire cutter is just the level of control that it gives you. You can get in there and create some really interesting shapes that you just can't get with a knife, and it gives you a really, really smooth finish. You just need to make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area, particularly if you're using foams that create quite a toxic vapor. I'll probably put my mask on in a second once I finish talking, just because of how much I've got to cut, and I'll throw the fan on as well. Just one thing to note is as the wire heats up, it does slacken. So if you've got it taut really tight, if you've got it wound really tight when you first sort of set it up, you will lose a bit of that. So you can put a spring in your wire system to make that a bit more sort of elegant, but it's just not something I bothered with because I'm just kind of tinkering with it. The temperature of your wire is dependent on the ampage and the volts and the resistance of the wire, I guess, as well. So the natural kind of heat that I'm sitting at is hot enough to melt foam but not paper. I just had to make sure I peeled off all of the paper coverings before I got to work. So yeah, I'm going to jump in and start making ourselves some rock. So I've hit a lot of the areas with the hot wire cutter and created some really fantastic kind of cliff effects and the beginnings of shaping rock faces, which starts to look really nice. But the hot wire cutter is best at really broad stroke stuff when it comes to large rock pieces, and then I find it's better to kind of go in detail with the old-fashioned scalpel and sandpaper and start to put in all those individual rock elements and all the detail pieces. I've left a couple of our sides completely untouched with the hot wire cutter, and they'll be really detail heavy with just the scalpel, and then we'll hit everything with some sandpaper and start building up all of the putty layers and going into our rock work. So the hill is really coming together. The rock work is looking really nice after I hit all of the hot wire stuff with my scalpel and really started to create those rock faces. Before I go in and start sanding and putting putty in, I'm actually going to start assembling the ruin, because that'll kind of help guide what happens around here, and then I can flow on and carry it on. Plus I'm also going to add a few little kind of ruins throughout the whole mountain rather than just up the top. So the next thing to do is start sorting and assembling the ridiculous amount of tiny pieces I have, and pretty much start playing Lego. So I'm going to jump straight into that. So the foundation of the building, the first sort of structure, has dried overnight, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's got like serious structural integrity. The glue I'm using, the weld bond, is working absolutely amazingly. Now, while I cast some more bricks, because I've actually run out of the kind of key pieces I need, I'm going to finish off the hill, sand it all back, and start applying all that putty and gravel and rock and kind of building up that beautiful mountainy texture. And I can work that all in around the foundation now that this is down. And I'll probably incorporate a few other little stairways and kind of other ruin elements to spread the ruin across the hilltop, rather than just having kind of one plonked structure. Really make it feel like it's lived here, and it really melds with the whole environment and really sits in there quite well. So I'm going to jump into that. So construction is finished. I've got all of my rubble down, all of my rock work, and of course the structure itself is looking fantastic. The plaster is just so easy to weather. It comes up with a really fantastic effect. I think I've integrated it into the hill pretty well with these little staircases, and kind of where it's situated feels pretty natural. So I'm pretty stoked with it. Now we're going to undercoat it and get straight into painting. So I've hit the whole thing with my classic undercoat October Brown in Design Master. Doesn't dissolve foam and gives really great coverage on all of these rocky elements, and I've hit the structure as well, and then I've gone and put in all my base coat. So I'm starting with a nice deep kind of blue-grey for the base coat for all the stone and cliff elements, and then started to kind of work in a few lighter browns over the top of the October Brown in the kind of rocky areas that are going to eventually become sort of ground that's covered with grass and tufts and that sort of thing. So the plan from here is just the classic scheme of graduated browns with a few bone highlights and just kind of creating a nice broad texture of colour to kind of build static grass layers over. And then with the stone we're going something a lot more similar to my Osgiliath theme with that kind of nice white stone. So we're going to work up in graduated greys and then use a lot of brown washes in between highlight layers as we move kind of into that lighter spectrum to really build up the dirt and kind of that real texture that shows age and really worn stone, and then some nice white kind of high dry brushing tones with really light grey and white to pick out the final details. So it should come together pretty sweet. Let's jump straight into it. Alright, so we nearly had a huge screw up, but I managed to use my brain just in time. I was going to start washing all of this top ruin section, but of course it is glued together with a water-based glue, and the wash most likely would have, if not weakened, left a crumbling pile of bricks. So pretty stoked that I managed to save that, so I had to adjust the technique and just use some different combinations of wet blending and dry brushing. So I think the ruins come up pretty well, particularly with the short time window we've got before our next Battle Company's game. So now I'm going to start applying all of the static grasses. Now I'm going to be using basically the same techniques that we went through for the Rohan terrain piece. If you want to check it out really in depth, feel free to watch that one. I'll link it in the description. But the only difference this time is that I'm going to be using some different colours to match with an existing board that I have. Some summer greens and some spring greens as opposed to the kind of yellow prairie look. And I'm also going to be using a bit of a more advanced contrast ratio by creating some nice big tufted bushy areas with 10mm long kind of deep green to make some kind of stuff sticking out of the rocks and around the place, mixing in that in with all my other spring greens. So it's a bit of an experiment to see how this kind of new sort of grassy scheme will come together, but I'm just kind of using the materials that I've got heaps of, and I want to get them all used. So it should turn out pretty well. Let's go and have a look at all the tufting and see how it turns out. Alright, so she's finished. I'm really stoked with how she came up. The Hirst Arts molds are just amazing to work with. I really love how easy they are to rubble and ruin and give kind of really unique texture. They're so textured on their own already, and there's so much variability in each little mold. Like, you get so many different forms and so much kind of creative freedom within each mold. They're really fantastic little kits, and you know, you can build them how they're intended, or they give you this really great scope to experiment and create heaps of stuff. So I absolutely love them. I think the blend of the static grasses work pretty well. Combining the kind of taller stuff and the short stuff always works nice. I'm not a huge fan of this particular long length of wild grass. I think it looks a little bit synthetic and doesn't really read as a natural fiber, but I was able to blend it relatively well with the shorter stuff and kind of make it pay off, and the rock work looks nice kind of sporadically through. It really reeks of that kind of lower Arnor waste of Rudau and Oregon and all of those kind of beautiful little areas of that northern sector of the northwestern sector of Middle Earth. So I'm really happy with how she came out. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. I think it's nicer for me to do a few builds like this that are sort of a bit smaller and contained for kind of hero pieces. It gives us a kind of varied length of videos rather than the huge projects. We get some smaller ones every now and then. Means I can get more stuff out frequently. Also means I can test methods as well, and that's really what this board is all about. It was my kind of test case for all of the techniques that I'm using here to move forward into my big Arnor board. I'm going to do a huge 4x4, not huge in size, but huge in scope for Fornost. And we're going to have the wall and the outer gate and lots of inner ruins and beautiful pines and lots of Arnor goodness. Maybe a bit of snow, we'll see. Might be experimenting with a bit of a winter scheme, and that's for our finale for our Battle Companies series, so as all our intrepid companies reach Arnor. So look for that in the future. If you guys love what I do today, let me know, jump on in the comments. We always have such a great conversation about building terrain and gaming in general. So keep that up, like, subscribe, you know the deal. I love making all this stuff, and the more feedback I get, the more motivation I have. So please drive me forward to more creations. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Lachie. This is Zorpazorp Gaming. We'll see you next time. Enjoy hobbying and enjoy SPG gaming, guys.